The first sign of the shift was the dying office plants. For over 15 years, I had cared for that ficus tree, a stupidly resilient specimen that had survived 2 different company founders, a massive data breach, and even an intern who once tried to microwave their lunch on the server. But now, its leaves were yellowing and droopy, as if it sensed a change in the atmosphere. The air was no longer fresh with collaboration, but heavy with the stench of manufactured superiority, a scent that seemed to waft from David's corner office. 15 years I'd worked at this architectural design firm. 15. I wasn't the charismatic face of the company or the one giving keynote speeches. I was the silent force, the one who knew every project's history, who held the blueprint for every client relationship, and who signed the forms that made potential crises disappear. I had saved this company's reputation more times than our so-called innovation team had pitched a functional idea. From managing our multi-million-dollar project budgets to overseeing compliance and vendor contracts, I was the hidden infrastructure that held it all together. Then came David, a slick, young consultant with a smile like a rental car salesman and a haircut that belonged in a tech startup. His disruptive ideas somehow all involved dismissing employees over 40 and replacing them with a crew of young, hyper-energetic men in matching blazers who called everyone Chief. He walked in with his oat milk latte and a dictionary full of digital buzzwords. Within a month, he was attached to our head of operations, Martin, like a career parasite, whispering empty promises of synergy and efficiency. If you're still listening and you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, now might be a great time to do it. It helps keep this whole storytelling train on the tracks and lets our team know they're not just screaming into the digital void. All right, back to the mess. David's campaign began with optimization, his favorite word. It never meant anything good. He started merging our interior design and structural engineering teams, departments that didn't belong together. He cut long-term contractors and brought in his own people, who turned out to be old friends from a tech firm that had folded faster than a cheap paper umbrella. At first, he was all smiles with me. "You're essential, Eden," he'd say, clasping his hands together like a youth pastor. "We truly value our legacy employees." I knew better. He didn't want my counsel. He wanted my access, my deep institutional knowledge, my calendar invites, and my budget keys. I gave him just enough information to make his presentation sparkle, but not enough to actually take over my responsibilities. The erosion was gradual but persistent. Meetings I'd always attended were suddenly rescheduled without me. Important emails I wasn't copied on. Projects I had overseen for years were reassigned to Kevin, who once asked if design files could get digital rust. When I questioned the logic, David just flashed a grin, saying he was reimagining our internal synergy, which I knew translated to, "Get out of the way, you dinosaur." But I wasn't panicking. I was observing, watching his every move, who he praised, which hands he shook, and which he let go. I saw how Martin, once a grounded leader, started echoing David's jargon like he was auditioning for a spot on a daytime talk show. Agile framework, lean pivot, ideation hubs. And I watched how the younger women in the office, sharp, innovative, and full of potential, started avoiding David's glass-walled office. I found one of them, Sarah, crying in the break room after a performance review where he'd called her too emotionally reactive for leadership. She had a master's in project management and ran our entire logistics system for 18 months without a single error. David didn't care about results. He cared about power. Still, I said nothing. I kept my head down, my tone pleasant, and my work flawless. Behind the scenes, I started meticulously documenting every policy shift, every questionable budget request, every deleted chat message, and every hiring conflict of interest I could sniff out with my long-held professional instincts, because I knew David thought he was replacing me, But I wasn't being replaced. I was being underestimated, and that was going to cost him everything. The first major thing David did was rename departments. He didn't restructure or improve them. He simply rebranded. Suddenly, my operations and strategy division was now part of growth enablement. What in the world did that even mean? One day, I was overseeing compliance and contract renewals, and the next, I was supposedly scaling customer fulfillment. If that sounds like something pulled from a fortune cookie written by a hedge fund manager, it's because it was. My job title didn't change, just everything else about the work. He moved my top analyst, Emily, over to his team, reporting directly to him. No conversation, no transition plan, just a chat message that said, "Quick FYI, we found a better fit for Emily's talents over here. Appreciate your flexibility." My flexibility? I had let him live this long. That was my flexibility. Then it was Marcus, a procurement specialist who could negotiate a 10-year vendor contract with nothing but a whiteboard and a cup of coffee. Reassigned to a cross-functional learning initiative, David announced. Translation? He poached him to fill the spreadsheet-shaped holes his buddies couldn't figure out. The worst part wasn't that they left. It was the apologetic looks they gave me. Quick glances, hushed whispers in the hallway. They knew this wasn't a promotion. It was a chess move. I was the queen David was trying to corner. I stayed outwardly calm, too calm, the kind of calm that makes people nervous. I started color-coding my files with obsessive precision, printing out agendas, time-stamping emails, and writing meeting notes with the clarity of a courtroom stenographer. I wasn't documenting for my own memory. I was building a war archive. And Martin, our head of operations, went from daily check-ins to telling me to just handle it in 3 weeks flat. We used to brainstorm solutions together, fixing budget shortfalls over coffee in his glass-walled nook. Now he just nodded along with whatever jargon David spilled across the table, like he was hypnotized by the sound of his own company being turned into a buzzword blender. At one point, I tried to raise a red flag, pointing out that David had approved company summit catering expenses that were 2.3 times above the original vendor quote. Martin blinked at me as if I had just spoken an ancient language. "Maybe you're misremembering the numbers," he said, his voice dripping with manufactured patience. "David's got a solid handle on things." Misremembering. I had the literal receipts, but instead of slamming them on the table, I smiled, nodded, and added another entry to my growing dossier. Page 37. Gaslighting attempt. Budget discrepancy. 3:14 p.m. David's smile only got wider as he chipped away at my territory. He was like a raccoon in a suit and lanyard disguise, scavenging for credit on anything that moved. He presented one of my old workflow models at a board preview as his personal innovation. I was sitting right there. He didn't even blink. Martin clapped, but still no visible rage from me. I doubled down on my performance. Every report was flawless, every task on time. I greeted his every insult with the polite precision of a guillotine. The others started noticing. People who used to rush past my desk started slowing down. Some lingered for a few seconds too long. One whispered, "Hang in there, we see it." I nodded, but I didn't need sympathy. I needed silence. Silence was better. Silence meant they didn't know what I was doing after hours, who I was talking to, or who I was quietly looping in. They didn't see the USB drives in my lock drawer, each labeled by quarter and coded with 3-letter nicknames only I understood. They didn't know I'd started pulling public filings on David's previous company, that I'd noticed an interesting overlap between our new design software vendor and his old roommate from business school. They didn't know I'd booked a lunch with someone from the parent company's auditing team, someone I once helped with their kids' private school admission back in 2016. Let David keep playing his game. Let him poach, rename, and undermine. He thought I was reacting. I wasn't. I was carefully rearranging the pieces. Because you don't win chess by yelling. You win by letting the other side think they are in control, right up until their king has nowhere left to go. I heard it through the damn HVAC vent. I wasn't eavesdropping, not on purpose. I was in the back conference room, my old war room, trying to print out a vendor contract that David's team had somehow managed to turn into a 48-page flaming disaster of jargon. The printer jammed, of course, and while I was elbows deep in toner and frustration, I heard his voice drift through the vent. Legacy employees like her? You keep them around just long enough to figure out what they know. Then poof, time for early retirement. Got to evolve or die, right? There was a chuckle. Male, young, new. Is she, not aware she's being phased out? Phased out. Not fired, not replaced. Phased out, like I was a damn screensaver. That's when it clicked. Not the printer. The setup. The missed emails. The vanished calendar invites. The projects pulled like rug threads under my feet. This wasn't just disrespect. This wasn't even garden variety corporate erasure. This was David preloading the narrative, framing me as outdated, uncooperative, and difficult. He was softening the ground so when the axe came down, it would look like my fault, like I'd failed to adapt. Cute. HR had naturally ghosted me. I'd emailed twice that week about my org chart access being revoked and the sudden change to my PTO accrual tracking. No response. The third time, I got an auto reply. Angela is currently out of office for the entire week. A week when David was very much in the office, smiling like a possum that had found the trash can open. They were going to do it publicly. I could feel it. The company summit was coming up, and David loved a dramatic closing. He probably thought firing me the same night I was scheduled to receive a Legacy Leadership Award would be poetic, like putting down an old friend during halftime. But if he wanted theater, I'd give him Shakespeare. I started with my laptop. I pulled my files, my real files, not the sanitized junk in the shared drive, but the originals, the ones with the financial discrepancies, the event budgets, and the vendor cross-references that made David's web look a little too incestuous to be accidental. I encrypted the drive, backed it up twice, stored one copy at home and one off-site. Next came the emails, flagged, sorted, annotated. Every deleted thread, every off-the-record chat message was forwarded to my personal inbox using a script I wrote during the pandemic when they thought blocking downloads was a cute idea. Then I got quiet. Too quiet. I stopped asking questions. I started nodding more in meetings. I gave David that I'm tired and grateful for my paycheck look. It worked. He stopped watching me so closely. He thought I was resigned. That's when I reached out to Catherine. Catherine is one of those people who doesn't show up in org charts but can stop a promotion dead with a single text. She used to run compliance for the parent company before taking early retirement. I mentored her replacement, so we stayed in touch. Birthdays, holiday cards, shared gripes about high heels and low pay. I sent her a short message. Thinking of making a move. Might have something you'll want to see first. Her response was instant. Let's do lunch. My treat. Bring hard copies. Then I reached out to Joseph from the CFO's office. Mid-level, but sharp, fast, and loyal to the kind of order David couldn't fake. Back in 2017, I helped cover for him when an error in a forecasting sheet nearly cost him his job. I never asked for anything in return until now. I kept it vague. Need eyes on a few numbers. Quietly. Are you in? His reply? Always. Finally, I sent a burner email to a board advisor. I once babysat his dog when his housekeeper quit the morning of an earnings call. Long story, longer memory. I signed it simply. You might want to be at the company summit. Second row, left aisle. And then I waited, composed, steady, like a fuse wired to the foundation of a building no one noticed was already leaning. David thought he was planning my exit. He didn't realize he was setting the stage for his. I met Catherine at a diner that smelled like burnt toast and government secrets. She was already in the corner booth, jacket off, tie askew like she'd wrestled it off mid-panic. She looked at me the way men look at thunderstorms on the horizon, equal parts awe and dread. "You said it was urgent," she said, sliding me a mug without asking how I take my coffee. She remembered. Of course she did. I handed her the file folder. Thick, tabbed, color-coded. Inside was a curated tasting menu of David's incompetence, deceit, and opportunism, served cold with a side of forensic accounting. "Jesus Christ," Catherine whispered after 10 pages. "Keep going," I said. "It gets better around page 34. That's where the vendor contracts start looping back to his previous employers. You'll love the signatures. Very familiar." She flipped faster, stopped, and blinked. "Wait, this guy is hiring his own roommate's consulting firm? His ex-girlfriend runs the catering company that billed us $183,472.84 for the company summit? Almost triple the approved budget," I said, sipping my burnt diner coffee like it was fine champagne. "He's counting on the event being flashy enough to distract from the numbers. Most of the board is too busy shaking hands to read the fine print." Catherine looked at me like I'd handed her a live grenade and a manual written in Latin. "Does Martin know?" "I think he knows just enough to be dangerous. David's been feeding him a narrative. Legacy bloat, old systems, outdated culture. He's buying the pitch because it sounds like progress. But David's not innovating. He's embezzling under the guise of transformation." Catherine exhaled slowly. "You've already started your endgame." I didn't reply. I just pushed the second folder across the table, thinner, glossier, titled Contingency Plan, Leadership Realignment Proposal. "You're not just burning his house down," Catherine muttered. "You brought the blueprint for the rebuild." "Someone has to. I've already outlined a restructuring model. Minimal disruption. Cuts dead weight. Reinstates ethical oversight. Most of the board will love it once they see it wasn't their idea. You'll present it, not me." Her eyes darted up. "Not going to speak. Not until I have to. Right now, I'm just a legacy manager about to be honored at the summit. Wouldn't want to make waves." She laughed once, bitter. "God, I forgot how terrifying you are when you're calm." I smiled. "That's when you should worry." By the time we left the diner, the sky was bruised with sunset, and Catherine's phone was already buzzing, probably cross-referencing vendor IDs with internal disclosures. She didn't say goodbye, just grunted and drove off like she was headed into a war she didn't plan on losing. Back at home, I lit a candle, not for drama, but for ritual. Then I finalized the dossier. Everything I'd been gathering over the last 2 months. David's hiring history and known associates, conflicts of interest across vendors, tech platforms, and consultants, budget discrepancies tied to the summit, travel expenses, and training retreats that looked suspiciously like golf weekends. Emails showing directives that were written after approval, and screenshots of chat conversations that had self-deleted but not before I ran my data scraper. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't petty. It was clinical. Each file had a label. Each label had a date. Each date had a number that linked to one of David's paper cuts across the company's trust. And when you added them up, it told a story. And that story ended with him walking out, not waving, not smiling, just gone. The last thing I did that night was print 2 clean copies of the dossier, one for Catherine, one for the CEO of the parent company. He didn't know he'd be attending the summit yet, but he would. The summit smelled like desperation and over-budget champagne. Crystal centerpieces glittered under rented chandeliers. A string quartet played some soulless corporate arrangement of a classic rock tune. Waiters in bow ties served lobster bites to people who called themselves thought leaders and hadn't thought an original thing in years. I wore black, not the cocktail kind, not sequined or flirty. No, I wore executive black. Structured, clean, quiet. The kind of black you wear to boardrooms, funerals, and coups. People smiled at me as I entered, the kind of tight-lipped smiles that say, "Heard you're on the way out, but I'm too much of a coward to say it out loud." I smiled back. I was serene, icy, untouchable. The event was David's baby, his vision, his chance to show the parent company that he could elevate the brand. He was everywhere, posing for photos, shaking hands with donors, playing MC like he was hosting an award show instead of an evisceration. My award was scheduled last. Legacy Leadership Recognition, a slot reserved for the person everyone pretends to admire but secretly believes is a relic. A ceremonial pat on the head before pushing them off a cliff. And David, bless him, couldn't resist the drama. I was standing in the wings behind the velvet curtain, reading my speech one last time, not that I planned to deliver it, when I heard his shoes. Loafers, cheap leather, confidence borrowed from a title he hadn't earned. He leaned in like we were old friends. "Enjoy the spotlight, Eden," he said, his voice syrupy. "Because it's your last time under it." I turned. He smiled, so pleased with himself. "You're done here. Just made it official. HR will send your paperwork Monday." I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I just nodded. "Oh," he added, "I'll be accepting the award on your behalf, but feel free to say a few words. Closure and all that." "Of course," I said. "Wouldn't want to rob you of your big night." He smirked, turned, and strode through the curtain. I waited 10 seconds, breathed, then smoothed the front of my jacket, stepped out from the wings, and walked straight to center stage. The room was packed. Board members, clients, donors, staff, their champagne flutes frozen in mid-air. David was halfway to the podium, mic in hand, confusion flickering behind his smug little eyes. I took the second mic from the hostess, smiled warmly. "Good evening," I said. "Quick correction to the evening's program." Silence fell. Dead. Total silence. Even the string quartet stopped mid-note. "Apparently," I continued, my tone light as air, "our VP of Growth Enablement has decided I'm done here, effective immediately." He wanted me to know right before the speech, which I thought was a nice touch of symbolism. A ripple moved through the room, gasps, shifting chairs, the sound of champagne being set down very carefully. David was frozen, mic still in hand, his face somewhere between "oh" and "this wasn't in the script." "And since he's handling HR now," I added with a half smile. I suppose he thought he could handle this too. That's when I saw him, at the back of the room, the CEO of the parent company. Black suit, no tie, leaning against the wall like he'd been waiting for his cue. I hadn't told anyone he was coming. He stepped forward, walked past startled donors, past frozen executives, straight down the center aisle as if he owned the oxygen in the room. David stepped back, clearly confused, tried to gesture at the CEO like maybe he could explain this away with a firm handshake and a buzzword, but the CEO didn't even glance at him. He walked directly to me, took the mic gently from my hand, turned to the room, and said, "Actually, David's done here." The floor dropped. Someone gasped. Someone else dropped a glass. David just stood there, mouth open. No script, no backup. I stepped aside, calm, centered, focused. Let the CEO speak. Let the board whisper. Let the room tilt on its axis. I had done what I came to do. The moment wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was just precise. And the night was only beginning. The seconds after the CEO spoke stretched out like molasses over broken glass. "Actually, David's done here." That sentence cracked through the ballroom like a bullet made of ice. You could almost hear the oxygen evacuate people's lungs. Glasses paused mid-toast. Forks hovered mid-air. Someone in the back coughed like it was the only sound left in the world. "David," He didn't move. For the first time since he'd strutted through our doors with his gelled hair and empty briefcase, he looked small. Not defeated, not even angry, just confused, like a golden retriever that accidentally walked into the wrong wedding. The CEO turned to me, just a glance, before addressing the room. "I'd like to thank Eden for 15 years of unmatched service, and I'd like to apologize that her dismissal was neither authorized nor appropriate." He said it without raising his voice. No theatrics, just fact. Corporate execution with surgical precision. I could feel the blood rush to my fingertips. Not from fear, but from adrenaline. Vindication is a strange kind of high. Not warm, not celebratory. More like clarity with fangs. David finally found his voice. "Wait, I think there's been some confusion." "There's no confusion," the CEO said, cutting him off without even looking his way. "I've reviewed your recent hires, your expense approvals, and your misuse of delegated authority. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Please return your badge and company property before leaving this evening." The "this evening" landed like a slap. He didn't say Monday, didn't say let's schedule a conversation. He said now at a company summit in front of the board, the donors and the servers passing shrimp cocktail. Security didn't rush in. They didn't need to. The pressure of silence was enough. David opened his mouth again, then closed it. His face flickered between fight and flight, but he couldn't land on either. A moment later, he turned, no eye contact, and walked stiffly toward the exit. Nobody clapped. Nobody stopped him. The CEO handed the mic back to me. "The stage is yours if you still want it." I looked at the crowd. Their eyes were on me now, not as a relic or a placeholder, but as something harder to define. Something they didn't expect to survive the purge, let alone stand tall above the wreckage. I raised the mic. "I had a speech," I said, smiling thinly. "It involves some fond memories, a few thank yous, and a tired metaphor about passing the torch. I think we're past all that now." A few scattered chuckles, nervous but real. So instead, I continued, "I'll just say this. Leadership isn't about volume or spectacle or flashy rebrands and bloated summits." I looked out, letting my gaze pass over the board members, the executives, and the employees who used to whisper, "Hang in there," in hallways. It's about stewardship, about knowing where we've been and having the guts to carry it forward without selling out the foundation. That foundation is still here. I'm still here. Then I stepped back. Not dramatically, not teary-eyed, just enough to let them sit with it. Let them feel the tectonic shift that had just taken place beneath their catered feet. The CEO nodded once and then applause. Not polite, not forced. It was slow building. It started on the left side of the room. Joseph from finance, Catherine's protege, one of the junior project leads. And then it spread like fire. I didn't smile. I didn't bow. I didn't need to, because I hadn't just survived David's coup. I'd outwritten his entire playbook, and the next act was mine. David made it halfway to the double doors before his ego caught up with him. He spun around, red-faced and puffed up, his voice shaking just enough to betray the panic under all that performative confidence. "This is a misunderstanding," he barked, gesturing like he was calling a foul at a pickup game. "This is political. This is retaliation." The CEO didn't blink. He simply reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, pulled out a manila envelope, and opened it like he'd been waiting for this exact tantrum. "I thought you might try this," he said. Calm, clean, clinical. "So allow me to read just one paragraph from the internal review we conducted." He unfolded the first page, cleared his throat, and spoke with all the warmth of a guillotine. Page 9, Section 3. The Vice President in question authorized the reallocation of funds totaling $183,472.84 to a vendor registered under the name of a former business associate without proper disclosure or board oversight and in direct violation of Fiscal Protocol 11B. The room went dead again. Someone gasped, probably from legal. The CEO folded the page, slid it back into the envelope, and nodded toward the back. "Security," he said. Not barked, not shouted, just said it. And two men in black polo shirts stepped out from the wings like the universe had rehearsed this moment in advance. David looked around like someone might stand up for him. No one did. He turned toward Martin, his former ally, puppet, and shield. But Martin looked pale, his hands clenched on the tablecloth, eyes cast down like a man watching his own career bleed out in front of a crowd. David's last stand was pitiful. "Are we seriously doing this here? In front of everyone?" His voice cracked at the edges. "You don't even... This isn't due process." The CEO didn't even raise his eyes. "Your badge, David." That was it. Security didn't manhandle him. They just escorted him, one on each side, like ceremonial dishonor guards at a very quiet, very public funeral. The doors closed behind him with a soft hiss. Then the noise started. Not clapping, not murmurs. The first wave was board members pushing back their chairs. Some headed toward the CEO, others toward me. Half looked furious. The other half looked like they'd just seen the second coming of fiscal accountability. "Eden, we need to speak. Why didn't you bring this forward sooner?" Who else knew? I kept my voice low, measured. I said the same thing to each one. I brought it to the right people at the right time. Some respected that. Others hated it. But none could argue with it. They had the dossier now. Catherine had passed it out like communion wafers in the back of the room. Page after page of documentation, vendor histories, bank account cross-references, and chat logs that had been deleted but archived through my fail-safes. No emotion, just facts, just math, just receipts. I didn't gloat, didn't apologize. I let the silence do what silence does best. Trap people in the echo of their own choices. Martin tried to approach once. I turned away before he got within 5 feet. Not because I was angry, but because I was done. He'd stood by while David dismantled the company's ethics brick by brick. And now, he wanted absolution, a handshake. He could retire with his pension and his guilt. That was his reward. Me? I wanted peace. And maybe a long bath. By the time I left the ballroom, my heels were silent on the carpet. The kind of silence that feels like justice. Not victory, not revenge, just alignment. The wreckage behind me was no longer mine to manage. Let the suits sort it out. I had other plans. The email went out Monday morning at 7:06 a.m. Subject line, Leadership Transition Update. Body text. Effective immediately. Head of Operations, Martin T. Williams, will be stepping back from his duties due to ongoing health-related stress. We thank him for his years of service. Health-related stress. Translation. He saw the ship tilting and jumped before it sank with him in the captain's chair. There was no press release, no photo montage, just a sudden quiet where his calendar used to be, and a discreet removal of his nameplate from the executive directory around the building. By 10 a.m., I got the call. Not an apology, not even a formal offer, just a simple direct line from the CEO himself. "We'd like you to assist with operational transition for stability." I waited a beat. Let the silence hum. "I'll need full access," I said. "Autonomy to restructure. No middlemen, no shadow puppeteers." There was a pause. Then, understood, so I walked back in. No fanfare, no escort. Just me, a black notebook, and the unnerving stillness of people who now looked at me like I might be bulletproof. My old office had already been cleared. The intern, one of David's last vanity hires, had left behind a potted succulent and a branded water bottle filled with what I can only assume was ambition-flavored mineral water. I tossed both in the trash and reopened my file cabinet like I never left. And then I got to work. First, David's strategic hires. One by one, I pulled their files, reviewed qualifications, tracked invoice trails, and matched timelines. Half of them weren't even showing up to meetings, just forwarding decks from third-party consultants who billed us more per hour than the lawyers cleaning up David's mess. I revoked their access by the end of the day. No speeches, no theatrics, just a digital leash yanked clean. Next, the budget. I flagged every bloated event cost, every rebranding initiative David greenlit without oversight, every suspicious line item labeled executive consulting. I handed finance a corrected ledger with notes so sharp they should have come with bandages. Then the people, not the ones who stayed close when things got ugly. They were easy. I pulled them in quietly, gave them tasks, listened to their insights, and reminded them what institutional trust felt like. No, the ones I watched closely were the fair-weather friends. The ones who'd praised David in meetings and emailed me condolences after his fall. To them, I said nothing. I gave them clean slates and rope. How they used it was their business. By the end of week 1, the tone in the office had changed. Meetings started on time. Emails got shorter. People stopped covering their mouths when they whispered. I didn't make a speech. I didn't post a memo. I didn't revamp the mission statement or install beanbags in the break room. I just worked. And they noticed. Because competence doesn't need a banner. It just needs a moment. I finally had mine. The conference room was colder than usual. Frosted glass, soundproof walls, 10 chairs, one picture of untouched water, and a silence that felt less like anticipation and more like a final judgment. The kind of room where decisions happen that don't get emailed out. The kind of room where futures are redirected with a nod. The CEO sat at the head of the table, sleeves rolled. No preamble. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Let's begin." One by one, he read off the points of the new leadership structure. Titles shifting, oversight chains tightening, budgets realigning. The company, he explained, was entering a new phase, one where strategy was not just marketing spin, but actual operational scaffolding. One where accountability wouldn't be optional. And then he looked at me. "We'd like to offer you the newly established role of Chief Strategy Officer. You'll report directly to the board. And only the board. No applause, no gasps, just the collective stillness of people who suspected this was coming and now had to adjust their posture to it." I didn't smile. I didn't hesitate. "I accept," I said. That was all. No speech, no dance, just a pivot point disguised as a sentence. They moved on to the next item. Budget realignment, department reviews. But I wasn't listening. I was already working, mentally, opening tabs, filing pieces, executing plays I had designed in my sleep. By week's end, I made my first official move. I reinstated the mentorship program. The one David had gutted because he didn't believe in legacy ladders. The one that had helped 3 women in accounting get certified and 2 operations associates transition into leadership. The one he said didn't align with our agility roadmap. It was back, and it was bigger. Then came the purge. Quiet, surgical. No pink slips, no public firings, just a ripple of revoked credentials and redirected workflows. David's inner circle, his hallway echo chamber of yes men and cheerleaders, found their calendars empty. Their chat channels archived, their influence evaporated. They weren't fired, they were erased. And in their absence, real work began. Processes that had buckled under bloated jargon started humming again. Junior staffers started speaking up in meetings without glancing over their shoulders. A new intern program was approved, a burnout relief initiative fast-tracked. No one thanked me. They didn't need to. I wasn't there for applause. I was there to correct the program. That's exactly what I said at the close of our next quarterly planning session. I stood, closed my laptop, looked around the room, and set it simple, steady, final. Let's correct the program. No fireworks, just a recalibration. Just a woman in black taking back what was hers. One decision at a time. Fade to black. Moral of the story. This story reminds us that true strength isn't about the title you hold or the amount of noise you make, but about the depth of your character and the quiet power of preparation. A person's greatest asset is often their integrity and their ability to remain calm and meticulous in the face of chaos. When you are underestimated, you are given the ultimate advantage. Use that moment to observe, to plan, and to prove that competence and quiet confidence will always triumph over spectacle and empty words. You don't have to be the loudest person in the room to be the one who changes everything.